Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Today I am interviewing Pastor Elaine at the All Saints Episcopal Church in Hoboken, New Jersey. This hangs right outside the church, and we are here to discuss her open-minded view of Christianity and how she is working hard to bring some people back to the church. Let's go inside. Hi Elaine.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good, good. Now before we begin, I just want to let everybody know who is watching. We are both fully vaccinated, so it is okay that we are sitting here without masks.
Yes.
We are not a danger to anyone at the moment.
Correct.
You sort of changed my mind about a lot of things in 2019. I was on my way to work for Ash Wednesday, and you were standing out doing ashes to go. You gave me ashes and probably a little card or something maybe. And that night, I was just thinking about it, and I was like, she gave me good vibes. I felt very, cool about her, for lack of a better word. And then that night, my girlfriend and I, we went, she's actually Jewish, but she came in anyway. And we sat there for the service, and you actually came up and spoke to us.
I remember that.
Do you
I
really?
do remember
You
that.
came up and spoke to us,
Yeah.
and, it was just a very loving, warm vibe. And I said, I think this is a little better than the Catholicism that I might have grown up with. So that's my story. Where are you from, and what was it like growing up there? I know you just told me a little bit about that.
Well, I grew up in a very small town in eastern North Carolina.
What town?
Grifton is the name of the town. It's near Kinston, which is the next biggest town.
Okay.
There's not a lot going on there. It's gotten even smaller since I was there as a child. Yeah. It's one of those tiny towns that's probably, they're going to have to roll up the sidewalks eventually. But I was the youngest of 6 kids, and so it was just, it was all family and playing outside and, small town life.
Right.
I grew up, as far as I can remember, as far back as I can remember, we'd go to church on Sunday. My older brothers were choir boys, which they could not imagine doing that today. But, and as soon as I could sing, I was singing in the children's choir because I was a church musician for many years. So, but we only lived there until I was not quite 8, moved to Tennessee for a while outside of Nashville.
Very nice.
And then we were there for a few years, then moved back to North Carolina to Wilmington, which is a little better known the southeast near the beach. And so that's where I graduated from high school.
Very nice.
Yes.
Very nice. And what were you, I know this is a weird question, but what were you like growing up? Were you outgoing, shy? What did you like to do? Were you an athlete?
I have a brother who's 17 months older than I am, so we were
Almost
pretty
Irish
close.
twins.
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time playing with him. And my 2 older sisters, one's 5 years older than me and one's 6 years older than me. I was like their baby doll. By the time you've got 6 kids, you're a little tired as a mom. And so, so I was like their charge. And so I spent a lot of time with my siblings, and I remember being so bereft when they went off to school and I couldn't go with them.
That's sad.
But it was at a time and a place where there was a lot of independence. I did, like I said, spent all of our time outside, digging in the dirt and wandering around and coming home when it got dark and being immediately put to bed.
Exactly.
Yes, or even before dark in the summertime.
Right. It's funny. It makes me think of my mother. She grew up in the 60s and 70s, and she would say she grew up in the city in Boston. And she would say when she was 6 years old, she'd go on the train, she'd walk around with her and her brothers and sisters, and nobody...
You don't think twice about it.
You don't think twice about it, know? And I also noticed that you had a lot more free time as a kid, it seemed like.
I do think sometimes kids are overscheduled.
Yes.
And when my children were growing up, I tried to let them kind of choose. But then they wanted to do a lot of things. And so I went along for the ride. Spent a lot of time watching swim meet and,
the
all
most
the
exciting.
Right? Yeah.
Well, I was a musical theater kid, so think
I
of
had
my
that
parents.
I had that as well. Oh, yeah. Spending a lot of time building sets and doing all the things.
And grandparents falling asleep in the front row.
Accompanying the choir, helping with the music,
All of that. Okay, so that I just wanted to get a little bit more background on you. And just a little bit more, did you grow up in a religious household? And if so, what denomination?
Well, I grew up as an Episcopalian. My mother had converted. She grew up Baptist. But sometime in the 50s when she started having children, she decided to become an Episcopalian. So that's how all of us were raised. My dad was the son of a Baptist minister.
Okay.
He never made the leap to the Episcopal Church, and there were many times in my childhood that he would take me to the Baptist church, and I think that he was close to getting me to go up for an altar call, but I think my mother would have killed him.
Right.
So I have a little bit of both. I don't know that we were extremely religious, but we were regular attenders at church.
Okay.
And then when I started organ lessons as a teenager, I played the piano since I was a very little child. Then it became much more of a thing for me to go to church and practice, and to substitute for the organist when she couldn't be there, and so then it became much more a significant part of my life. But as I said, my brothers served as acolytes, and I sang, and we went to church every Sunday and vacation Bible school and all of that. But I don't know that it felt more like just the thing that you do.
Cultural.
Yeah. It was kind of a cultural Christianity at that point.
Right. Everyone went to church.
That's right. Which is definitely not the case now. So which is one of the reasons I stand down next to the pastor.
And look, it worked.
Exactly. I mean, I baptized a baby. A woman came up and said, "I just gave birth. I want to have my child baptized." I said, "Here's our number."
Yeah.
And so, that's one way of getting beyond the walls of the church, of the building, which I think is really important.
Definitely in this day and age.
Yeah.
And what led you to the priesthood?
Boy, that's a long and
Okay.
winding. It just took a long time. I mean, it really started when I was serving as a musician. I was directing choirs, and had regular work as a church musician. And there's something that happens when music and the words that are said and the preaching that's done and all of that, when it comes together, it can really help people experience something divine, something holy and sacred. And so I began to realize that I wanted to be in the broader planning, not just the musical part. And so that was really when it first started. But in the Episcopal Church, it can be a long, drawn-out process, which it was for me. And so I was actually, a very mature adult by the time I went off to divinity school. And that was 3 years, and then I was ordained, and here I am.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you found sort of a divinity through music.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
beautiful. A lot of people, I think, they find God first, and then that's interesting that you found a spiritual presence in something creative.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, in a lot of traditions now, the evangelical traditions where music is kind of rock and roll or repetitive or whatever, but there is that sense that it's tapping into the endorphins and making you feel good. I mean, and I understand that, because I think that is something that that religious experience can do. And for me, it happens to be a much different kind of music, as organ and hymns and all of that. Right, It's a little different, but I think there is a connection there.
Definitely, I agree with you. This is also a very broad question. We're getting into the broad questions before the more pointed questions. What is your biggest takeaway from the teachings of Jesus?
Love your neighbor.
Love your
It's
neighbor.
all about love. We have the sign out front. That's the quote from the presiding bishop that says, "If it's not about love, it's not about God." Because there's so much hate spewed in the name of religion and in the name of God, and I think that's false teaching. I think it's absolutely contrary to the teachings of Jesus. So Jesus, what Jesus did, the first thing he did when he started this ministry, he gathered a group around him, a group of friends, created community, which is what we try to do replicate in church. We form disciples, teach them, this. If we're following in the path of Jesus, then this is what we do. We love our neighbor. We pray for our enemies. We clothe the naked and feed the hungry and take care of the poor. And that's really what we're here for, taking care of each other. So that's it.
I agree with you. I agree. And when you were talking about some of the hatred being spewed, it's interesting to me that some of the political people that are so big proponents of the church spew the most hate.
Yes, they do. And it's very distressing, because it's a very narrow view of Christianity, or really any faith tradition. I don't know of a faith tradition, whether it's Islam or Judaism or anything else, that has that kind of narrow view. God is beyond our understanding and beyond our reckoning. The best we can do is hope that we get some part of it right. And the part of it that's clearly right to me is that God is love, and that we're to live into that love. And so spewing hate just does not compute.
And what a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of work to be so angry all the time.
It must be exhausting. It must be exhausting. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from that,
Mhm.
were you always an advocate for LGBT people and people of color, or is that something you learned after studying in the priesthood?
It wasn't really after studying. It's, growing up in the South in the 60s,
Different time.
it's a different time. So these things were not even in my frame of reference.
You weren't even thinking
I mean,
about it.
right. I mean, a highly segregated world that I lived in. But as I grew up, it's just being more exposed to the world. I told you when we were talking before, I've lived in many different places. And so I think the more you're exposed to different places and the world has changed, it becomes very clear that I grew up with a kind of privilege that I could ignore all these things, right?
Yeah, we still can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We could if we chose to,
Some
but,
do.
but right. But once you're aware of it, and as my husband would say, he says, I'm always on the side of the underdog. I mean, that I've been that way
Yes.
since I was a kid. So it's like if someone is being maligned or oppressed or discriminated against or abused or whatever it happens to be, then that's where I'm going to focus my attention. So it's been progressive, but I would say fairly early in my adulthood, it became very clear. I think first would be LGBTQ as opposed to the racial issue came later, because I lived in suburbia, and it's easy to ignore. But when I started working in the city, it became very clear that systemically something was not right. So that's what that really is. So it was a progression in my life.
Right, I agree. And I think many people who, regardless of where you are from, if you just stay where you're from and you never leave and never expand, your mind's never going to expand. You're never going to have different opinions. You're never going to grow and learn if you just listen to the peanut gallery that's all around you. It's not the best way to be.
I said I was a church musician. Most of the organists that I knew early in my life were males, and they were gay. I mean, that was part of the deal, right? So that was probably why that became something that I was more at ease with, I guess, early on. And then once you realize that most of them had to be closeted, or at least don't ask, don't tell, then it becomes an issue of justice, and that's where I get involved.
Right, exactly. And I mean, when I think of, I went to Catholic school, when I think of Jesus, he was never hanging around with the high priest or the kings and the queens. No. He was with the beggars, he was with the prostitutes, he was with the sick and the poor, and it somehow got diluted throughout the years, and it's a little confusing to me.
Agreed.
What do you say to other Christians who challenge your open-minded perspective?
All I can do, what I try to do is not get into arguments, because there's just no way you can't win them. Because to be quite honest, there are things in the Bible that are clearly contrary to what I believe the teachings of Jesus to be. In certain passages, homosexuality, you're not supposed to do that. Slavery is condoned. Divorce is the worst thing.
Right.
And so to say that our lives are governed by social norms of 2,500 years ago or 2,000 years ago, it's as if to say that God's revelation ended then, and we live with that, and that we just know better than that,
Exactly.
So to take the spirit and the intent, the overarching message of the Gospels, which is good news, it's not bad news, it is good news, and it's good news about love and finding joy in community and serving other people. So I just try to do the best I can to do that, and don't get in too many arguments, because I find that it doesn't work. It's like feeding the trolls on Twitter.
It's not gonna. They have to come to it on their own.
That's right.
It's not gonna work.
So I try to model a life that says this is how I live my faith. And I pray for the others.
How does it feel being a woman in the ministry, and how does your husband feel about it?
My husband's my biggest supporter.
That's amazing.
So he's absolutely on board with this, and he's always been. He believed in me and that I had a call to priesthood long before I did. So cheers for him. In the Episcopal Church, we came rather late to women's ordination. It was the 70s, which now that's been 40 years, but that's not very long in the history of the church. Some other denominations got there before we did. And even now, just recently, the latest study has been published that shows that women's are not equal in the positions they get, not equal in the pay that they receive. Now, I will say that in my position here, I'm treated more than fairly, and I think equitably. I have no complaints, but
Right.
I know that it is an issue. Women don't get the churches that can afford to pay them well. Those still tend to go to men. So it can be a challenge. There's still sexism. There's still the ones who want to comment more on my hair and my earrings than on my
What you're
preaching.
saying,
Right,
yeah.
It's not so bad here. I mean, this congregation is because it skews very young, so they're a little less inclined to have those kind of traditional women's role values, right? So I don't get a whole lot of that from my people here, but in the past I have.
Okay, yeah, I can understand that. I'm sure, especially maybe even from the South or the Midwest.
Yeah. Well, when I was in Virginia in Charlottesville, there was one dear old lady who I just adored, and she said to me one time, "Your makeup is always just perfect." What was I going to say?
Thank you.
Thank you. That's right. Thank you very much. Yeah.
And just to get a little sweet and romantic, how did you meet your husband?
We actually met in church.
Really? How old were you?
We were both. I was in my first marriage at the time, so I was in my early 30s at this point.
Scandal.
Oh yeah. But then, I mean, we just knew each other then, and then after my divorce, and he had already been divorced, because we both love God and we love church, and we love to talk theology and Bible, which is kind of a nerdy thing to admit to.
I think it's very fascinating.
But we also love sports and all kinds of things. So we just found ourselves to be very compatible. So we have been married 21 years now.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything else you'd like to tell people or people interested? Obviously, I will link all of your Facebooks and lives and stuff for people to tune in.
Yeah.
But anything you'd just like to say to the world about who you are and about the church?
Well, I mean, one of the things, I don't want the message of the church to be that we are, harsh and judgmental and don't want, or that, oh, come on, young people, we need you to come to the church because we're dying. We need you to come be on a committee. I mean, that's just not what I'm about. One of the interesting things of this past year, being in the pandemic, was I never expected that I would be live streaming services and creating my own YouTube videos and doing all kinds of things, which has been a great learning for me. But the real gift is that we've had so many people who have connected with us because they found us virtually. And I may never meet these people in person, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I would love to meet them, but I love that we have this reach that we never really had before. So in some ways, the pandemic has been a gift to the church in allowing us to get the message out more broadly. One thing I do want to say, I did a book study of How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. I did that last summer. Okay. I had people from as far away as Denver, Charlottesville, Boston, other places who could zoom in for a 4-week series. So that we're able to do these things the opportunities are endless. And so I love that we're able to get, a message about love and acceptance and joy and caring for each other out into a world where that's absent in a lot of public places.
Yeah. Totally agree. I think this was wonderful, and I know I shouldn't comment on your outfits, but I just noticed your blazer and your watch matched.
Oh, yeah.
That is fantastic.
Well, thank you.
Great. Very cool interview. Thank you very much,
so
Elaine.
much. I appreciate it.
Of course. Great.